All right, the first novel I'm going to talk about is called Atlantis Dying. And I think everyone's heard of Atlantis, and maybe it's an old myth. Maybe it was a real place, maybe it wasn't. The fundamental beginning for me in conceiving of the book was I had seen a documentary about the Sahara Desert. And that they now know from taking core samples from off the coast of Africa and stuff, that the Sahara Desert, only about 5,500 years ago, was as wet as Florida. It was an absolute wetland with all that went with that. There were channels, there was huge lakes, much larger than our Great Lakes, vast lakes. So there was also, I know you probably can't see that back there, but there was also, in the writings of Plato, he describes Atlantis, and he describes it in great detail. He says it's a true place. He says he heard this from his grandfather, who actually went to Egypt and was told about this by the Egyptians and shown hieroglyphs in the temples of what it was. And what they found is NASA took a photograph from outer space, just of all the planets like they do, and they found this land formation in the Sahara Desert over near Morocco, over near the coast. And it turns out that formation is almost exactly the same shape as Plato describes the city. It's got the same dimensions, it's got the same channels for the water that leads to the ocean. So after I saw that, I was thinking about it, and then the third part of it was that in this documentary, they said that what happened was that the Sahara Desert turned from this vast wetlands into what we see today in 100 years. Complete. Wow. Absolute. And today the Sahara Desert gets less than 2 centimeters of rain a year. So it's the driest place on earth. It's very dry. So I thought, okay, if Plato says Atlantis was a real place, and he says it looks like this, and they're saying, well, maybe this could be the site of Atlantis, which we're all running around looking for it in the Mediterranean, but they're saying, no, maybe it's over here on the coast. So I created a fictional story which was very much parallel to our political situation today, in which the scientists of Atlantis, through their study of astronomy, etc., they go to the king and they say, we know this is going to happen. You have only 100 years to evacuate the entire population of Atlantis, which according to Plato was like over 1 million people. So you only got 1 million people to evacuate, and you're back in the times when you don't have vehicles. You have boats and ships and stuff. So you got to move 1 million people, and you only got 100 years to do it. And then it turns out that it really does turn into a desert, and has stayed to a desert. And it will, now we know, through our science today, now we know why it turned into a desert, and they have a good idea when it will turn back into a wetland. And that is simply that the Earth, at a certain point in the solar system's movement around its orbit, and the Earth's orbit around the sun, at a certain point, once every 20,000 years, there's a place where it changes the tilt of the Earth just by a few degrees, but it's enough that it forces the monsoon belt over Africa to move a little bit further south. So South Africa stays very wet, and the Sahara turns very dry, and it won't turn back wet again until then. My second book, called Atlantis Obsession, was set in the modern era, and what it was about was a UF graduate student who is actually chasing his girlfriend, and he's obsessed with Atlantis, and he goes off to, he gets an opportunity to go to Africa to help communities drill wells in Africa for small communities, hand pumps. Turns out that under the Sahara Desert, even today, that there is, these vast lakes that were there have left a lot of groundwater. There's a tremendous amount of water under the Sahara, so the people are without water there, but it's only a few feet down. It's shallow enough that you could put a hand pump there, and the people in the small oasis communities could get their water. So he goes there to help them drill the water. While he's there are people who have the idea that they'll make great agricultural farms, and what they want to do is suck up all the water that's left in the ground to make these vast agricultural productions, which sounds like a good idea. Okay, we're going to feed all the people. But what happens is it's going to drain that water the same thing that happened with the Ariel Sea in Uzbekistan. And since it's not going to rain there for another 10,000 years, that water's not going to come back. Do I have how many minutes?
You have 4.5.
So that's the story in my two books. This one is strictly about politics, how the king wants to do it, but all of the politicians in the legislature and all of the land barons who own all the land, they go, oh no, that's a hoax. We don't believe in that. We're not going to move the people. We don't want to lose that labor force. We got to keep them here. Now, one thing I had noticed is that in fiction and in nonfiction, since the time that Al Gore first came out with Inconvenient Truth, a lot of fiction writers, a lot of science fiction writers, write very dystopian because we have this view. You got to wake up the world. It's going to all end if you don't act quickly. But we've had that, and I think people have woke up to it. They may not have done what we want them to do, but they realize that there is something. What I notice is that when I try to take something away from you, you resist it. When I give you something, you accept it. So I have this idea, I don't know how it works out in literature, but I have this idea that there are just a couple simple things that we can do that put a more I don't know if they're simple, but they put a more positive spin on it. So I remember, and I think everybody in this room remembers, that not very long ago there was this 100-mile wide hole in the ozone layer that had been caused by the fluorocarbons. And within a short period of time, we stopped using fluorocarbons and the hole healed itself up. So one simple suggestion that we implement is that we say every new residential construction below the Mason-Dixon line, this falls in line with Pat's idea, every new residential construction, we create a building code and say every house that you're building has to have a solar roof on it. It has to be solar powered. The second thing is that we transform the automotive industry into pure electric cars all the time. And then people say, well, yeah, but what about the strain on the grid? Well, no, you plug your car into your solar-powered house, which is already producing more power than the house is using, and you charge your car for free. So what am I giving you? Well, how about if I take away your combustion engine, but I'm giving you freedom from OPEC? You're no longer at mercy to them, right? You know, what am I giving you if I have all new houses built with solar panels on the roof? No electric bill. Okay, so yes, there's a cost for you and I to go, there's a tremendous cost for you and I to go and get our house converted to solar. But you put that into new construction, it's buried in the mortgage. Hardly anybody would even notice a change in their mortgage payment. It would be the same, very near it. Hardly any change at all. And what would be the advantage to the real estate developer and to the salesperson and the real estate person? Oh, buy this house, you won't have the electric bills.
Right.
Right. So it's like, could these things be done? Yes, they could be done. And if they were done, we might have the same net effect that we had with the ozone hole. That it might, more quickly than we predict, it might change it. And as Ellen said in one of her things that she sent to me, she said, we can do this. We can do it together. And that's kind of my feelings about that.
Please run for president.